Floods obviously cause problems to humans who live along rivers, so what can we do about them? There are many solutions, some of them easier than others. The easiest solution, of course, would be don't build in floodplains, but that's just not realistic. So let's look at some of the engineering solutions that humans have come up with. First of all, it's important to know what a levee is and how natural levees are built. So this is nature's form of protection against floods, and the way it works is this. The river is normally within its banks, but when a flood comes and it rises, the water overtops the bank, and at the very edge, the edge of the normal bank and the floodplain, the river begins to build up a pile of sediments that gets a little higher than others. And that's just because once you've started that process, then you've made it shallower there, and then more sediment will gather there. And so it's always a little bit of a slightly shallow spot, and therefore it's always going to attract more sediment and get bigger. So a natural levee builds up with time along the river bank, and that forms protection against floods because the higher the levee goes, the more water the river can contain in a flood. That's the system that nature has provided to help stop floods. This, of course, is not a natural levee. This is a private levee along the Mississippi River. It's doing a very good job currently of protecting this little house from the flood. People build levees along rivers to protect property, and they're usually built of sod like it is here. Sometimes there's even a road on top. Every once in a while somebody will do something like drive their Chevy to a levee. This is a cross-section of the city of New Orleans during a flood, and it's a little surprising if you have never looked at this before or thought about it before. You can see on either side the standard water level marked as 0 on Lake Pontchartrain to the north and on the Mississippi to the south. But during a flood, the water level rises, of course, in both places, and the town of New Orleans is actually at a lower elevation than either one of these two really large bodies of water. And that is what makes floods along the Mississippi in New Orleans so very dangerous, because the town itself is lower elevation, and if those levees don't hold, the city will be buried like it was, of course, after Hurricane Katrina. So another thing that people do other than build levees in order to control floods is they build things like flood walls. Flood walls can constrain the river within a relatively narrow channel, and that can be very useful where you happen to be if the floods stay lower than the height of the wall. Of course, they don't always, as you can see on the right. But it does push the problem further downstream. You're going to, instead of spreading that water out over the land upstream and letting it soak in, it will make for a larger flood at your downstream neighbors. Dams are also used to protect against floods. They can hold a good deal of water behind the dam and the reservoir. And you can release water in a regular and controlled way so that you control the amount of flooding that happens downstream. These are all the dams in the state of Texas, and there are quite a lot. Dams are useful for flood control. They also can be used to produce electricity, and of course they form reservoirs or lakes behind the dam that can be used for recreation. They can reduce the effects of drought by storing water that you can use during a drier season. So there's a lot of positives for dams, but there's a lot of negatives as well. Just to name a few, dams stop sediment from moving downstream, so they starve the beach of sand. They cause more erosion downstream because the water that leaves the dam is sediment free, and so it picks up more sediment along the way. They can change the ecosystems along rivers. They can affect the migration and reproduction of species of fish and other animals. And of course, they drown the land wherever the reservoir forms, so you lose some land sometimes. Also, they can create a flood hazard. If a dam fails, there's a great deal of water that will be released very, very suddenly. So like a lot of things, dams have their ups and downs. But in terms of flood control, they do a pretty good job.